Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jason Rader, and I'm from Insight CDCT. I'm the head of the security practice there. And with me today, we have my colleague, Scott Ammon, who is a security principal in the Insight Cloud and Data Center transformation side as well. Thanks for joining us today, Scott.
Good morning. It's good to be here.
So our topic today is are all of your security bases covered? Sorry, that was a mouthful. And Scott, we've been doing this for a while. Two security professionals. When we were kind of talking about this earlier, thinking about, and since this session is only, not 48 hours long, how do we cover all of our security bases in that amount of time? So we were talking about, possibly using the current state of affairs as a good starting point for kind of having a conversation related to all the bases being covered. Are you cool with that?
Yeah, it sounds great.
So where do we start? What do we do? So we're sitting in this situation now. We've rapidly deployed a lot of workers. Let's also realize we had a security roadmap in place to begin with, right? And so there was definitely some stuff that we were planning on doing. We had kind of a wedge into some additional capabilities and a lot of stuff that we had to do to keep the business going. And now we've settled down a little bit. Where do we start?
Well, it's funny when I heard this topic of having your bases covered, it reminded me when earlier in my career, when I'm walking through the hallway, and I used to manage a security assessment team for a large financial institution. I'm walking through the hall, and one of our leaders asked me, how we're doing. We got everything under control. And back then I had a little bit more of a just less experience and had more of a sky is falling mentality, and started to kind of unload on all the problems we had versus focusing on some of the successes. And I was quickly kind of pigeonholed away in a corner by my boss and coached up a little bit about how we share information. So that's kind of what I thought about. And it's one of those things where I think this is a good opportunity for people to get prepared to be able to articulate, do we have our bases covered given everything that's changed and some of the uncertainty out there. And I think there are a couple of areas that I think of to be prepared to share information and communicate when you're having that conversation. And it's one of them is, I think, make sure you share the things that were successful. What did you do well? I think you want to instill confidence in the investment, and that you're getting a return for that investment that the business is paying for the security services you're delivering. And so I think sharing those successes is important. Certainly being open about where some of the gaps were and some of the challenges, and clearly articulating what the root cause was to those kinds of things. And I think also touching on something that we don't talk about a lot, and that's kind of the unknown. What don't you know? A lot of times I think, again, we want to kind of exude confidence, and we've got everything under control, and we do our job, and we're using the money that was invested well. But really to talk about, if you look at where you were 6 months ago, you had a plan. What's that plan look like right now? A lot's changed. Might be looking at a much larger remote workforce, and maybe your plan didn't really account for that. But also trying to predict the next 6 to 12 months and what you're going to need to do to make those changes. And I think, finally, just make sure you have a clear plan in place to be able to articulate what you're going to do about it, and maybe some areas where you're still working on it.
Man, you touched on some things that are near and dear to my heart for sure, because I totally hate the whole FUD side of security, that whole fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And it doesn't help when all of your reporting back to the business has to do with those things, right? And I'm a big believer in, it's not the lines, it's the delivery, right? We've got to show how security is supporting the business and enabling the business. And those metrics are just as important as those other things about, unsolvable security problems that exist in the climate today. So yeah. I love that. And I also think, you brought up a topic that I think every security person's kind of been with, of that kind of how are you doing? How are we doing? Because, I had a boss that told me one time, if I go into the finance side of the business and I say, how are we doing? They can give me a number. If I come to you, what do you give me? And I think that's the other, how are we doing? We're like, well, medium, that's not a great way to report security in an organization. So you definitely hit the mark as far as that goes.
It's 2.5 level of maturity, just gloss over.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. The board loves that thing. They're like, oh, excellent.
Okay. Yeah.
So I love that, what did we do right kind of thing. So what do you think? What are some of the things that people probably did do right, or some things they can still continue to do right now in the midst of kind of still adjusting to the new normal, as folks are calling it?
Yeah, I think a lot of security organizations, they kind of maintain even keel by doing assessments, right? And I think again, it's the future is a little bit unpredictable right now. You may have furloughed a lot of people, right? So you might be bringing them back, but you don't know when. So when you're thinking of things like how you do endpoint security, well, that may have completely changed from 6 months ago because you've got a lot more people that are working remotely. So I think just taking the time to do an assessment, again, taking into consideration some of the things we already talked about. But I think going out and discovering what's on your network too. I think we've worked with a lot of companies and to help get the remote workforce stood up, and that happens really rapidly. As we know, a lot of times with security, it's kind of an afterthought sometimes, particularly when you're recovering from something, unless it's a breach. But if it's a DR type situation or something like that, security usually comes in later and kind of plugs holes, right? And so I think that's probably a key exercise to go through right now, is to find out what's different about what's on your network, and then start having some plans around that. You've got, again, zero trust has been talked about a lot, but this is a situation where you do have a lot of networks that you're not going to trust. These are people's home networks. I know I have no idea what my son does when he's gaming, but I have a feeling probably some bad stuff crawling around based on my firewall. So.
Yeah, same. I have two sons as well. Understand that very well. And so I think that whole assessment thing, yeah, how do you approach that? Whenever we kind of broach the topic of assessments, sometimes they're like, well, we've done this already, kind of thing. Yeah. Is how do we justify that, especially if we're in a situation where cost is a significant thing right now? We've had, we don't necessarily have all the cash in the world to accomplish all of these additional problems, and we've furloughed workers, so visibility is high in the organization as far as that spending. How do we talk to the business about that?
Well, that's a good question. I think, I think in this circumstance, I think in any, any time when there are challenges or there's a lot of change going on, I think that you have to look for the opportunity versus focusing on the things that are hard, right? I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think if it's used the right way, in terms of doing an assessment, not so much are we secure, but more, do we need to make adjustments to the plans that we've communicated previously? This is a good time to do that because Perfect. A lot of security leaders, and I've been one of them in the past, where I've gone down a certain path and then realized that maybe that wasn't the right path to go down. And there may have been some significant some spend behind that, and it's kind of hard to go back in and say, hey, look, I think we made a mistake and we need to kind of pivot here. And so I think there's a good opportunity to assess those kinds of things.
Dude, that is an important aspect as well. I think that there's this weird kind of shroud over security folks where we've got this belief that we have to know absolutely everything and we can't admit that we're wrong. It's funny because, everybody assumes, well, I guess we also kind of put off this air that we do know everything. But the point is we can't know everything. And, I always talk about people that are at least our age, right? We didn't go to school for security. There wasn't a security curriculum that existed when I was in university. So basically you get a lot of folks in those senior roles that have MBAs or other things like that didn't touch on security. So how are you supposed to know, especially with the ecosystem changing so much? I think it is a crazy thing to assume that you're going to have all knowing knowledge, or there's a line of, threat intelligence that you can just consume and then everything's covered at that point. So I love that aspect of, hey, we might have made some mistakes and we're going to alter the course. And you can't figure that out without understanding where you're at.
That's right. Yeah. And, I think, and I'd say it's kind of a new normal assessment more than anything, right? Versus kind of not thinking about the traditional way of, hey, we're going to do a compliance assessment for PCI or high trust or whatever it is, right? Yeah. I think this is more, we need to make some changes in how we've been delivering security. And it's got to be based on how our business has changed, because certainly the organization, the way it does business and delivers it, is going to change. And I think just going down that path. So there are things, again, we kind of touched on, what's on your network and those kinds of things. But I think if you think of other things like, what vendors and partners did we have during this time that really stepped up? Which ones maybe weren't, maybe they just weren't big enough, and they've suffered from this, unfortunately, right? And what do we need to change in terms of third-party risk management as it relates to that? Working with your procurement folks and those kinds of things. Again, funding is going to be an issue. Certainly, we have a lot of companies have furloughed people, and so you might have a lot of security solutions out there that you don't have somebody to run anymore. You may not know anything about them because of the people you've furloughed. And so I think tools rationalization is a good conversation to have as part of an assessment as well. So I think those are just some of the things that I would take a look at right now.
No, for sure. All of those things are are huge. And you mentioned, I think earlier, the 80-20 rule. And I think that's key, right? I know we always kind of talk about that. Well, all it takes is one mistake for the bad guys to get in, right? But assuming that there's no targeted attack at your organization and there aren't folks rallying and writing malware specifically to target you, that 80-20 rule is a pretty good rule to roll by, right?
For sure. Yeah. And I think, without getting too deep, I'm not a lawyer, but I've worked through a lot of breach response.
But I play one on TV.
That's right. Dealing with attorneys and those kinds of things in terms of policy and what kind of liability we're looking at, cyber insurance negotiation, all those things. And what, a lot of times what comes up is ultimately when you're trying to defend whether you've done the right things. I mean, they're going to look at, was there due care taken and due diligence, those kinds of things. That's what they're going to look at. And they're going to do some sort of industry comparison from a peer standpoint where you're doing the basic things you should have been. And that kind of gets into, right now is a good time for doing a lot of security hygiene as well, right? You've had a lot of changes, getting out there and looking at who has access, getting rid of user accounts, looking at the amount of permissions that have been granted to people, particularly around remote access. I mean, those are the kinds of things you can be doing right now. Looking at the policies you have on the prevention detection types of solutions you have, and cleaning those up or modifying. But those are all things you can be doing right now that I think, will put you in a good position. You can continue to maintain some momentum, and do it from an 80-20 perspective, certainly. Because I mean, you're never going to be perfect. Things change all the time, as we've experienced. Everyone's experiencing right now globally. So.
Absolutely. And a lot of those things that you just mentioned aren't tools. Those are just processes that your security organization, maybe having a little bit of downtime now, should go back and kind of check. It's not an additional tool. It's just a review of security that's been deployed in a lot of fashions. And I love what you said about, the legal aspects. Again, the business leaders right now are struggling. And again, if a security event happens, and there's a liability associated with it, it's never, in my experience, and I have been an expert witness in the past, it's never been a 100% liable or 0% liable. It's somewhere in the middle. And you've just got to prove, to your point, that due care was taken. We did our due diligence. We figured out what the threats were. We mitigated those to an acceptable level within our organization. What you can't, basically unplugging everything is the only way to truly be secure, right? But it's one of those things it's hard. And again, that's more of the businessy side that I think is kind of unique to the way that we approach security versus just the technical aspect of things. Certainly an important part, but the way that security interfaces with the business is huge.
For sure. Yeah. I think, from my experience is really more on that side of the house from a service delivery standpoint versus, product implementations, those kinds of things, which I'm, involved in. But ultimately, we want to be successful in whatever it is we're investing in, right? We want, if you're making an investment in a large technology solution, just implementing it and turning it on and getting the data doesn't really do anything for anybody. And quite frankly, it's actually more harmful, because now you've got all this data you need to do something with. And that, again, from a liability perspective, if you're not reacting to the kinds of things you're finding, it can put you in a little bit of jeopardy. So.
Or even worse, a false sense of security that, I just put that thing out there covered.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Yeah, and so I think hygiene is a really important area to be focused on right now, particularly given all the changes going on.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of back to that 80-20 rule, where I also, budgeting and that kind of thing. You talk to security folks, you talk to leaders and organizations, and security could be this giant black hole that we can never fill with enough money, right? Where are some of the other places that you think folks should maybe focus on?
Yeah, we talk a lot about security by design. We've talked about that for decades, and it's meant different things to different people at different times, right? And so I get a different answer no matter who I ask. But mainly the way we see it in the field, I'd say, is you've got you might have checkpoints within your SDLC process. That's all been blown up with DevOps, right? The rapid pace of it. But you'd get a security architect or somebody on the project to help with assessment, make recommendations, check to make sure that those recommendations are implemented. And then once it goes into prod, it's turned over to the security operations team and they monitor it. I mean, that's traditionally been kind of the model. But I think now, again, I think you can really build a good case right now for making some cultural changes and getting support from leadership and your IT partners to start building security in, whether that's secure images, whether that's really understanding role-based access controls, multi-factor authentication, that they're planning those kinds of things into the development lifecycle. Because after it's a teach them to fish, right? I mean, that's the mentality there. And I think doing that will do a couple of things. One, it'll obviously reduce risk. It'll improve your security posture over time. But I also think, if we don't see kind of a going back to the old model and restaffing the security teams as much, it's going to help with that too. It's going to be a bit of a force multiplier for these security teams that might not, security resources are hard to find, especially good ones. And so I think focusing on that is an area, again, where 80-20, right? This is about maintaining a certain threshold, establishing a risk profile and maintaining a threshold around that, not hitting the target every single time. I think that's a good way to do that.
No, and I love that cultural change aspect, because I think that's giant. And even, you talk about DevOps, and I think, some people say they do DevOps, but they just call it DevOps now. It's the same thing that they've always done. I think, again, that culture change that you have to move your organization to get to really, realizing the benefits of that is something that a lot of folks think it's a technology solution, right? Oh, I got to just, I got to do this, I got to do that. And to your other point, that whole don't bolt on security at the end, build it in, that is a giant cost savings. I mean, it's worth the effort to do that, because just from the way that you mitigate risk, but besides the cost that's associated with the bolt on versus the built in.
Yeah, and I think, I just think where things are headed, security is usually behind. They're trying to play catch up for a number of reasons. But, the rapid adoption of cloud-based services, I think even looking at, a lot of companies struggled. Their VPNs got pounded when they tried to go to remote workforce, and they just weren't scalable. So they're looking at cloud-based security solutions now to apply policy and all that, so that they have the scalability and the reliability if people can't get into the office, for example, or can't access the control. So I think that's an area where, again, you can build into those types of services fairly easily, because there's a cost associated with the services you consume. And so I think if you build a model, right, that's easily replicated, but also the other, the adoption of highly virtualized environments, containers, spinning up virtualized environments and dropping them for capacity, those kinds of things. I mean, that's a security problem. That's a huge security problem, trying to manage and orchestrate all that stuff. And so I think it's really imperative that people start going down that path with a little bit more emphasis.
For sure. And the security requirements being built in on the front end as well, just having a requirement for security as opposed to a requirement for the functionality of what you're trying to put in that container. A lot of folks misconstrue the whole containerization of something as to be security, and that is absolutely not it. Just like moving something to the cloud doesn't make it more secure. Right. It could in fact make it less secure depending on how you deploy it. I'm not saying the cloud platforms aren't secure in and of themselves. I'm just saying it's a platform. Just like you can put something on a server and have it unsecure in your data center, you could put that same workload in the cloud and it can be just as insecure, because you're not managing the role-based access control and the other things associated with that, and understanding the data that's being processed or created by that application. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, and I think, I've had a lot of conversations over the years of, well, the cloud's not secure, and it's difficult for them to justify that. But I think a lot of times, I shouldn't say difficult, it's just they don't have a justification other than, I think it's ignorance and unknown more than anything. But that's changing. But I also think that part of it is you lose a little bit of control when you go to a cloud provider, right? And you just need to understand where you can maintain it, what you need to make sure is there. But they have an incentive to maintain a secure environment. Right. They have a really strong incentive, because it's like a bank, right? If they're not secure with your money, you're not going to bank there. So I just, keep that in mind.
No, and I think there's a certain amount of shade that the traditional security folks throw at the cloud, because they've got to change, right? I mean, that changes the whole world. And there's a little bit of, we've all got that kind of old AS400 box that sits in the data center, that there's that one guy that knows how to make it work and nobody wants to mess with him. I mean, it's kind of the same thing when we go to the cloud. Does security change? I mean, the governance model shouldn't change, but the controls that we use change. The operationalization of those controls changes, and that's complex. Would I, as a business leader, expect my security team to ingest all of that and get super good at it before we do it? No, that's where you use external entities to come in and help you rationalize and understand this stuff.
Yeah. I'm still upset about losing my trusted Solaris environment because of that.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting time that we live in. So I think, what about the aspect of, we just talked about some things that are really ambitious, I think, to a lot of organizations. What if we're just sitting here kind of looking at a deficit from a security perspective? Maybe it's not even 80 that we can actually cover. What do you say to those folks that just simply, are hoping they get lucky, or, that we've just got to cover on this one side? Is it okay to have risk in your organization? Is it okay?
Well, sure. I mean, I think you have to first come to terms with the fact that you're always going to have risk in your organization. So it's a matter of prioritizing that. But I spent a lot of part of my career doing is running an IT audit group, right? And one of the things I discovered during that time, because it's a little bit different to doing an assessment, you have to collect evidence to justify your findings and those kinds of things. In assessments, you don't always do that with the same kind of rigor. You sample that kind of stuff, but it allowed me to get out into the business more and really talk to the people that were using the applications and the systems and understanding their job. And when I did that, you start to find out that that what the end user thinks is important, his boss or her boss's boss might not feel as important at all, right? Because they know that they have a different way to do it. But you've got to have those conversations, get out into the business, really understand what's important to them, and then align your protection strategy accordingly. But also just you gotta have to get consensus with that kind of thing. You can't just arbitrarily make decisions and expect them to accept it. And you're going to get the best guidance from them. And I think when that happens, they've got skin in the game. They better understand, what you're trying to accomplish from a security standpoint. And ideally some of that's documented. So again, it will help you if there is a breach or litigation or anything in the future. But I mean, I think it's really important to just come to grips with it, understand what risk you face, whether it's your industry, healthcare, what's going on in the wild currently. Are you being targeted like some law firms, have been, or the utility industry, for example. So I think understanding those kinds of things and then just aligning your plan accordingly is really important.
You just said some really great stuff. So I've been preaching this kind of thing for several years, right? Security's got to get out of the dark rooms and get into the boardrooms, right? We've got to go across and it's a partnership with the business. A lot of times we see this compartmentalized, it happens with IT, it happens with security, where it's kind of us against them mentality. We just do, it's kind of like if we've got a statement of work, we fulfill it exactly to the letter, but we're not going to do anything else kind of thing. That's not really a great way to approach security. It's not really a great way to approach business in general, but security doesn't get done that way that maybe we used to be able to get away with it when it was just a firewall and a rule set that we had to manage.
Yeah, for sure. But I think also just the rapid pace of change with businesses and what they're adopting is it's critical that you have a cadence with them around these kinds of things, and that can just be part of a regular risk management conversation too. So that you have annually. Sure. So, yeah.
So I think kind of we've established the fact that there's an 80-20 rule, right? Get the stuff that do the stuff that's going to provide the most impact to the organization. You're obviously not going to be able to eliminate all risks. But also from that aspect, make sure that we make the business aware of the risk that they're exposed to. And that is okay. It's okay to have risk in the organization. It's okay to not have that coverage. It's bad to hide the fact that we don't have that coverage. It's better to kind of say, hey, here's what we can do. Here's where we think there's an exposure. Here's what we're probably willing to accept on this. And here's our roadmap for how we're going to get better. And we're going to adjust it in real time based on how the business rolls.
Yeah, and I think right now, and particularly right now, I mean, you've got to make the effort to understand what matters to them to keep the lights on, right? I mean, you've got to stay in business, otherwise.
Yes.
And I think this is a good time to be able to demonstrate that you understand that when you're having conversations, because it can be a difficult sell right now to make any sort of changes from a security standpoint, and from any standpoint in the business. But given that this is our space, I'm just think it might be hard to be making any changes right now. I think everyone's looking, trying to figure out how to save money and how to do the best with what they have.
Yeah, and not to try to go down a whole nother tangent, but I think a lot of security features in technology products or in platforms that people use that have kind of been overlooked. I get this, kind of approach, especially in the enterprise space, where they want to use best of breed all over the organization, when in actuality, they have bought best of breed, but they're using a singular function from that best of breed tool that they bought that was maybe could have been done, maybe not having all of the fancy dashboards or something, but could have totally been accomplished. And then a custom dashboard or a REST API call or something could have been done to figure that out. I think now's that kind of introspection time to see, hey, what can the platform provide, or how can I, because definitely that licensing for additional tool sets and like you said, people that just don't know how to use the tools. I mean, that even worse. I'd hate to have best of breed tools and not even be evoking the performance that I really need out of that thing.
Yeah, that's a big area. I mean, that's why I buy specialty golf clubs, because it's not me, it's my clubs. So I just need one type
Exactly.
of club for different situations. But yeah, I think it's not just security solutions either. I mean, I don't think security does a very good job of looking at the technology, the core investments that have been made by IT and technology they use to manage their environment. A
Great.
lot of feature functionality around that. If you look at storage, they have to go out and detect data, right? They
Yep.
have feature functionality you can leverage. I'd say starting to look into some of those things, deploying software patches, all those types of things. Really taking a closer look at that and figuring out where you can leverage that instead of buying a one-off security solution that maybe now you don't know. You got to get people that are trained on it. Once people get trained, a lot of times they can make more money and they want to go somewhere else. So it's all these challenges you have are related to the investments in these solutions that you buy because you think they're best of breed. And I think another thing you touched on is you're not really using all the feature functionality. I don't know how many times I've seen somebody make a huge investment in something and they had planned on using some sort of preventative technology, and when they were testing it, it broke something, and the business said, "Don't ever do that again." And so now it's just monitoring.
Yep.
Well, I mean, there goes your investment.
Completely. No, that the greatest technology deployed haphazardly or not, deployed correctly is the user acceptance, and then goodbye. You're never going to be able to deploy that, even if it is best of breed.
Yeah,
I've seen that
that's
situation.
an area where it's really important to have good partners that can help you with that too, because whether it's coming in, ask your partners to come in and maybe take a look at things, do a health check. At this time when things have changed, or maybe you need to make some modifications that were different from the original plan and original architecture. I think they're more than willing to come in and sit with you and spend some time that isn't necessarily going to cost you any money, right? Just to help you make the most out of that investment and have a good partnership. So.
Absolutely. And, kind of a gold nugget to all those folks out there. You mentioned something, kind of about storage and data discovery and those kinds of things. I've seen folks where the security team didn't talk to the storage team, so they hire external consultants to discover the data on something that they could have just talked to the team about. Yep. Hey, don't hire consultants to do that. Have your guys talk to each other to save you some money, and then spend the money on the stuff like you said, Scott, to figure out the higher level stuff that's important.
Yeah, sure.
I think that build and transfer model is something that a lot of folks need to embrace more often. It doesn't admit defeat. Have somebody set this thing up, operationalize it, write the run books, and then transfer it over to your team, because then you're going to get the true value of it, and basically a throat to choke if it's not working the way that you want it, delivering that business outcome.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, I found the best solutions, the most elegant solutions on how to do things, or go talk to the subject matter experts. So if you want to know about database security and the best way to achieve the control environment that you're trying to maintain, go sit down with them. Say, this is the challenge. These are the controls we have to meet. This is the rigor we have to put around it. What's the best way to do this? A lot of times they have an automated way or something they can turn on, right? That'll help you do that. And you don't have to rely on external security solutions that you have to maintain.
Fantastic. Well, this has been awesome. So in a manner of wrapping up, so we talked about a lot of great stuff, and it was been fun. I think we'll have to do this again sometime very soon, Scott. But if you wanted to have a closing remark, Council, what would you say as far as where should folks get started as far as leveraging what the current state of affairs and trying to move their security posture forward?
Yeah, again, I think it's, I think we early in the conversation, we talked about having, doing some assessment, doing some reflection on what the plan was prior, what it is right now, just to kind of maintain the status quo. But what do you think the new normal is going to look like? Start working on that, but make those changes that if you could do it all over again, where would you start? What would you do differently? Some of that you can start to inject in what you're doing right now, because in a sense you are starting over in some areas, right? I mean, it's everything's different, and everything's going to be a little bit different. And so I think getting out, talking to your partners and the people you deliver the services to, starting to have those conversations about what matters and how they're going to change the way they do business, and then start aligning the way you're delivering security services. Understanding where your gaps were, understanding what you still don't know, setting a timeline on that, and a good plan, being patient. I mean, those are all things that I think are important. And then ultimately just communicating that well, right? Getting buy-in from the stakeholders, having a good plan and executing on that plan. And that's pretty much blocking and tackling, right? That should have been going on previously. So.
Awesome. Well, Scott Ammon, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Fun conversation. Everyone out there, thank you so much for joining us and spending some time with us today. We hope that you got some gold nuggets out of this. We've got lots of additional content at our website at insightcdct.com. I'm Jason Rader, and have a great day.
Thanks.